Welcome back to The Explainer. So, you've been working your way through the project of comparative biography, and you've probably just wrapped up 10 of Plutarch's most famous pairings. You've done the heavy lifting, you've grasped the core of his work. But having reached the end of those initial chapters, you might be wondering, what exactly comes next? How do we actually take this ancient wisdom and apply it forward?
All right, let's tackle this head on. Because finishing those first 10 pairings, that isn't the finish line. It's truly just the beginning of your adventure in the humanities. If comparative biography has caught your attention, and it absolutely should have, the obvious next step is to just read more. But reading more requires a game plan. We need to know exactly what to look for and how to synthesize it all.
Here is our roadmap for what's next. First, the remaining Plutarchian lives. Second, exploring the moral essays. Third, uncovering Plutarch's historical sources. And finally, mastering the synkrisis habit.
Let's jump right into part 1, the remaining Plutarchian lives.
Out of his original 23, there are exactly 13 more comparative pairings waiting for you, plus 4 single lives. Now, you could just grab a standard translation, like the Dryden Clough, and power through them. But to give you a bit of a head start, I want to spotlight 4 absolute must-read pairs that you should definitely tackle sooner rather than later.
First up, Aristides and Cato the Elder. These guys are the ultimate men of austere, republican virtue. They serve as a fantastic moral counterweight to some of the more, let's say, unstable figures you've probably already read about. And what's super interesting here is that Plutarch's final verdict actually catches a lot of readers off guard. Instead of leaning toward the Greek, he praises Cato's harsh Roman practicality over Aristides' uncompromising justice. It totally challenges our modern assumptions about virtue.
Next, we've got the destroyers, Lysander and Sylla. This one is absolutely fascinating because it shows the direct link between rapid political conquest and the total collapse of constitutional institutions. These are 2 men whose massive success literally unmade the very systems that produced them in the first place. It is a pretty stark warning from history, for sure.
Now, tragically, there are exactly 4 lost comparisons in the surviving texts. We have the biographies themselves, but those final analytical essays where Plutarch directly weighs the 2 men against each other, lost to time. Which brings us to our next critical pairing, whose concluding analysis is, unfortunately, one of those 4 missing pieces.
And that brings us to Phocion and Cato the Younger. We can call them the principal losers. These were guys who consciously chose to lose rather than win on bad, compromised terms. They both ultimately chose a principled death over caving to political pressure. You might know Cato from the lives of Cicero or Brutus, but Phocion is a bit of a hidden gem for modern readers. His story is incredibly moving, just a profound study in pure integrity.
Rounding out our must-reads, we have The Brilliant Ruined Men, Demetrius and Antony. This is essentially Plutarch's most direct sermon on how unparalleled greatness can just completely wreck a life. Oh, and a fun historical bonus for you. The Antony half of this pairing was the actual historical source material for Shakespeare's famous play Antony and Cleopatra. So, you're literally reading the exact text that inspired the bard himself. How cool is that?
Moving right along to part 2, exploring the moral essays.
Now, this stat always catches people off guard. Those famous lives we spend so much time on, they only make up roughly half of Plutarch's surviving work. The other 50% is this massive collection collectively called the Moralia, or his moral essays. It's an absolute treasure trove of philosophical and ethical writing that, honestly, way too many people overlook.
If you want deep insights, just look at some of these highlights. You've got On the Education of Children, which is basically a founding text of the humanist pedagogical tradition. Then there's How to Tell a Flatterer from a Friend, some of the deepest ancient analysis on self-knowledge you'll ever read. We also have On the Malice of Herodotus, a really sharp polemical critique. And On the E at Delphi, a beautiful philosophical dialogue set right where Plutarch actually served as a priest. These essays give us such a rare, vibrant look at how ancient history and philosophy were intensely debated.
Okay, let's pull back the curtain for part 3, uncovering Plutarch's historical sources.
Plutarch didn't just invent these stories out of thin air, right? He was a voracious reader of the historians who came before him. By mapping his subjects back to those older writers, you can massively deepen your understanding of any individual life you read. Reading about Alexander? Cross-reference Plutarch with Arrian or Diodorus. For Caesar, check out Caesar's own commentaries or Suetonius. For Themistocles, look to Herodotus and Thucydides. When you do this, you're not just reading Plutarch anymore, you're joining a massive ancient conversation and seeing exactly how history is crafted.
And finally, we've arrived at part 4, our level boss, mastering the synkrisis habit.
This is where we shift from just passively consuming text to actually performing the master technique of the humanities ourselves. Because the most important takeaway from this explainer isn't just memorizing ancient facts. It's about cultivating a portable discipline. Synkrisis is the formal practice of carefully weighing two lives against each other to render a moral observation. It's a critical thinking muscle. And the absolute best part is, once you grasp this framework, you can apply it to literally anything.
Let's break this down into a practical exercise. Just follow these 4 simple, highly portable steps. First, name the axis of comparison. Like, what is the central theme connecting these two people? Second, adduce 2 or 3 specific incidents from each life to act as your hard evidence. Third, render a clear, reasoned judgment based strictly on that evidence. And fourth, keep it short. Precision is the name of the game here.
Let's see how this works outside of ancient history. A really natural, rewarding exercise for American students is comparing George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. You've got 2 monumental presidents with vastly different temperaments operating in completely different moments of national crisis. But they were both highly conscious of their historical roles. They were essentially acting like Plutarchan figures themselves. Performing a synkrisis on them is an incredibly powerful way to process American history.
But hey, we can bring this even closer to home. You don't need famous historical figures to practice careful moral observation. In fact, the oldest practice of Plutarchian biography is comparing people you actually know. Try comparing a teacher and a parent, or 2 mentors, or maybe 2 friends who took completely different paths in life. This exercise only requires your undivided attention to the human character right there in your own community.
As you keep going with this project, mixing his writings with your own practice of synkrisis, you're going to find that Plutarch becomes a lifelong friend. I love the thought captured here. He's gentle, learned, patient, deeply observant, and honestly, he's pretty funny sometimes too. There's a very good reason people have been reading him continuously for 2,000 years. He is simply excellent company.
So, the big takeaway from this explainer is that this toolkit is officially yours now. You know the vast scope of his work, from the remaining lives to the moralia. You know how to track down his historical sources. And most importantly, you've got the formula for synkrisis. The lives are the work, but the synkrisis, that's the real skill. So go out there, read more, judge carefully, and ask yourself, who will you compare next?